called Theorizing Homophobias and the Caribbean Complexities of Place, Desire, and Belonging. This collection was put together and commissioned and edited and brainstormed as a project of the Caribbean IRN, which you'll hear more about later from Vidyaratha Kasoon, who's presenting more specifically on what the Caribbean IRN is. So I'm just going to jump really into where this project came from and what it's about. Can you go to the next slide, please? Thanks. So one of the things that happened when we were thinking about the Caribbean IRN really seeks, and its partnerships, we aim to provide a bridge between academia and community. And it's work that consistently challenges those of us in the diaspora to ground ourselves in local and regional work. Work that reminds us of the common different struggles we face as sexual minorities. Lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, questioning, queer, gender non-conforming, and all the names we give ourselves or all the ways we choose to identify or not identify. And the spirit of the collection, I feel like in some ways, for me at least, was inspired by something that Thomas Glave wrote in Our Caribbean, where he talks about however we identify and how we pursue our lives, thinking about ending silences and invisibilities begins here in this gathering. And he talks about this idea of a gathering, and I feel that what we did in the Theorizing Homophobias collection is a part of that extension. He said that this was the beginning, and I feel, and certainly this was not the first, there were a number before this, but I think this gave a kind of visibility to preserving our stories, sexual minority stories particularly. Next slide. And so this is from the introduction that Rosamond King and I wrote for the collection, and so I'll just read a little bit here and let you know a little bit what the collection is and what it's doing. So the collection represents mostly English-speaking territories, including Antigua and Barbuda, the Bahamas, Barbados, Jamaica, Guyana, and Trinidad and Tobago. It also includes Spanish, French, and Dutch-speaking Caribbean, Cuba, Puerto Rico, Haiti, Martinique, and Suriname. Complex range of sexual identities, preferences, orientations, and a few voices engaging with trans identity. The collection crosses disciplines, intersects communities, bridges theory and activism, and highlights the relentless and strategic work of community workers, artists, activists, and scholars across the region. This may be the strongest element of the collection, bringing together or gathering of voices in multiple media to offer a complex understanding of the Caribbean sexual landscape at home and abroad. Next slide. And so what we ended up with, and I'll tell you a little bit about how we did this, we ended up with activist reports, creative writing, critical essays, film, interviews, music, and visual and performance art that really ultimately, and this is how we ended up defining the collection, that reflects the complexities of homophobias in the Caribbean, while also expanding awareness of the Caribbean sexual minority experiences and activism in the region and its diaspora. You can peruse the collection at CaribbeanHomophobias.org. And before I sort of give you some highlights of what's in it, I want to tell you a little bit about how we got this collection together. So we spent about a year thinking about it. We put out a call for papers, and it came out of several projects that the Caribbean IRN initiated from 2008. We started as Sexualities. We brought together actually over 30 activists and scholars and artists and writers at what we called a Caribbean Sexualities gathering in Kingston, Jamaica in 2008. In association with the Caribbean Studies Association conference that was held there. And we also got to fund 10 activists from the region to attend that meeting. And one of the ideas from that meeting came this idea of theorizing homophobias. One of our participants in a 5-hour workshop said, it seems that what we really need to do is talk about the multiple ways that homophobia is, that there's one thing, that homophobia is complicated and looks differently across the region, and we can't only talk about it in one way. And wouldn't it be great for us to theorize differently? So that's where the idea started. We began thinking about it then. We brainstormed. We came up with a call for papers that I, Rosamond King, Colin Robinson, Natalie Bennett, and Vidyaratha Kasoon worked on, and we sent that out and started to think about what we wanted in this collection. Not only did we do an open call, but we also commissioned pieces from activists in the region and from scholars that we knew and from artists and from writers. And so we got an amazing breadth of response, and we were able to put together 20 pieces in this collection, and our focus was to have it online and free. and so that's why it's on its own existing website. And we wanted it to be that, we wanted it to be accessible, and that's one of the missions of the IRN, which we'll hear about later on. And so, let me tell you a little bit about what's in there. There's a lot in there, but this is just a kind of overview. We have visual art from Ewan Atkinson. We have a beautiful poem and film by Sekou Charles and Colin Robinson. We have some photography by Rodell Warner. We have an excerpt from the film, a Puerto Rican film called The Needle, about trans sex workers in Puerto Rico. We have a music video and translation into from Las Crudas, who's a lesbian Cuban hip-hop group. They're amazing, and we translated their work, so we have English and Spanish of the lyrics and also a music video. We have some interviews, which I'll talk more specifically about. I did a number of interviews, and I wanted to talk about that in relationship to my own work and how this work has allowed me to then do other things. So we have interviews with Bahamian filmmakers, Maria Gavin, Kareem Mortimer, also an interview with Steve Laguerre, who's a Haitian LGBT activist. We have a video interview. This is also really exciting. This is one of the first pieces we had for the collection when we launched the Gay Freedom Movement digital archives in 2011. So this interview with Thomas Glade interviews Larry Chang, which some of you may be familiar with, both of those people. And we also had commissioned activist reports, Colin Robinson, Vidyartha Kassoon, and Aaron Green, and an activist roundtable representing 5 countries, 2 critical essays, and creative writing, poetry, and fiction. Next slide, please. So we don't have internet here, so what I did some screenshots so you can see how what the homepage looks like. There are categories there that you can peruse and figure out how you want to see. We also have summaries of each piece so you can get a sense of it. And this is what this screen actually has 3 different roll bars, so you can kind of see parts of the collection. Next slide. So this is 2 different ways you can see the home page. There's actually a third too, but I just did 2 so you get a sense of it. Next slide. So this is our table of contents. We tried to really have a kind of mixture. We didn't want to privilege a particular discipline. We wanted it to be really multidisciplinary. We wanted art and music and critical essays and activist reports to speak to each other, to really share this complicated vision and understanding of sexual minority lives. And so this is just the sort of bits of it. We also have interviews by country, so if you're interested in looking at it, we're really thinking of this as a resource for people to be able to use in teaching, in studies, in sharing, in activist work, really thinking about it in a lot of different kinds of ways. To talk a little bit about a couple of things these are 2 interviews that I did. Particularly the interview in Haiti with Steve Laguerre. I was in Haiti doing other work after the earthquake, part of a grassroots healing collective, and so I was able to get contact with Steve Laguerre through Vidya and Colin, and I was able to meet him, and while I was there doing this other work around healing, and it was really an amazing opportunity to speak with him about his work, and I was able to transcribe that interview, and it is in English. And eventually we hope to have it translated into Creole, but that was one of the challenges of this collection. We do have some translation, but translation is very expensive. But we do hope that perhaps we will have that. But for now, it is in English. And then the interview with Bahamian filmmakers, I thought this was particularly important. I'm from the Bahamas, and these 2 films came out that had sexual minority characters in it. Kareem Mortimer's film, Children of God, which I know is screened here in Trinidad, complicated film. Interestingly, when I first saw the film, I hated it. I really, really hated it. I had such a hard time. I felt that it didn't fully represent what the Bahamas is and how complicated the landscape is. And I saw Maria Gavin's film, Rain, which has sexual minority characters, but they're not necessarily incidental to the story. But I thought bringing these 2 filmmakers together to talk about what does it mean to represent sexual minorities at this moment was really important. And by doing this and going back to the film, particularly Children of God, I was actually able to write an article about it, because I wrote a review about the film where I was really harsh. But then I went back to it, actually, and so it led me to doing some more scholarly work and thinking about the film in a more, I think, in a more complicated way. So actually doing this community work really transformed my ability to then talk about this film in a critical way. I felt like it needed critical attention as well. And so one of the things that I did was I looked at that film, Children of God, in relationship to Colin Robinson's poem and the film by Sekou Charles, Writing Boundaries. And so I wrote a piece called Searching for the Erotic: Boundaries of Male Same-Sex Desire in Caribbean Film, and it's actually forthcoming in a book collection on eroticism and black film. And so in the paper I look at the difficulty of examining same-sex desire among men and thinking about Audre Lorde's theory of the erotic, and using it actually to talk about the delicate nature of really examining what does it mean to love and live in spaces where we are overburdened by so many other things. And I talk about sort of situating the roots of homophobia at the intersections of misogyny, fear of the erotic, the feminine, and heterosexist patriarchy. And so I draw from Audre Lorde, but then I do this other thing where I think about how both that really Children of God is really burdened by trying to represent the religious Christian fundamentalism of the time and also the gay murders that happened in the Bahamas. And so that Kareem Mortimer is trying to represent that, and so he is in some ways overburdened to do that. But in Writing Boundaries, I sort of compare it, and I look at how the potential for really being able to explore the erotic is happening in the short film by Colin, which I assume people have seen, does that. So I compared the two, and I felt like it was a really important and a good contribution to that reading. Next slide. Oh, great. So we are planning a second collection. It's in progress. These are a couple of our websites for the Caribbean IRN and our email if you are interested in contributing to a collection. Some of the themes that we'd like to address in a second collection include emerging and new activism, community work, new theories, new stories, really continuing the work that we started. It won't be called Theorizing Homophobias, it'll be called something else. But I want to close by saying one of the things too that I think why the complexities of place, desire, and belonging ended up being a part of this collection is that we also looked at the entire collection and saw that what is happening is not just only this theorizing of homophobias, but also the complexity of wanting to belong, the complexity of really articulating desire, expressing desire, and whatever those desires are, and really thinking about belonging in a really complicated way, belonging inside and outside of nation states, belonging and not belonging to certain cultural and social practices, and also reformulating those ideas of same-sex desire and loving and longing. So I hope that gives you a sense of the collection, and we hope that we can get some contributions from everyone here.